Okay, so here we have our editing timeline. Let's begin with V1 and we'll work our way up. So here we have video layers 1, 2, 3, and 4. These are the workhorse layers, where most of the picture editing will be happening. This is where you'll be adding all your footage to craft the scene. You'll also be using these layers for adding simple effects from your editing software. That might include picture resizes, keyed effects, wipes, fades, dissolves, and on and on. Moving up, we've got V5. If your project contains any more complex, externally created graphics or visual effects, they'll go here. That includes things like green screens, rotoscoping, digital characters, and more. Generally, if you've got another team member or company responsible for supplying these pre-made visuals, assign them all to this track. On V6, we've got our temporary color correction and grading. You'll use this track to apply adjustments to all the video tracks beneath it. For example, you might want to add a large correction or grade across a large group of shots. Or you might just need to apply an exposure fix to only a handful of shots. This track is where you'll do all of that. So V7, this is where we'll add our matte. Whether you're working in 16:9, 1:8:5, 2:3:5, or any number of other aspect ratios, it's a good idea to add a true black matte across the footage. This is going to give a more consistent viewing experience for you and your client, director, test audience, what have you. Now, above V7, this is where we've got visuals that you might want to turn on and off for various reasons. By placing this content above our matte layer, we can simply monitor below if we don't wish to view or export what's on these tracks. So what is on these tracks? Well, on V8, we've got subtitles. This is where you'll typically add text from your editing software to caption any sections of footage either spoken in a language foreign to your audience, or that might be difficult to understand in an interview or documentary format. And finally, on V9, we've got a layer of titles with information about our various visual effects. That includes shot numbers, version numbers, and any other information you and your team use for tracking. Of course, this layer only applies if you're using visual effects. The higher we go up through our layers of video tracks, the less likely it is you'll need to use them. On complex projects with larger teams and high-end VFX, you'll use them all. On simpler projects, possibly even those being cut from final, color-corrected footage, you might only use tracks V1 through V4. Whichever scenario you find yourself in, these 9 video layers will cover all your bases. Alright, now let's take a look at our audio tracks. So, first a word about track order here. The tracks are arranged from top to bottom in the order you'll be cutting them. You'll be cutting dialogue first as you structure out your scene. Then, you'll build out some of your sound effects and your ambience, and then finally, you'll add music, temp or otherwise, if the scene requires it. Alright, so starting with A1 through A3, we've got 3 tracks of mono dialogue. Why mono, you ask? Or maybe you don't, but I'll tell you anyway. Dialogue is almost always recorded mono to eliminate any potential problems that might arise from a stereo recording. Dialogue recorded in stereo is asking for trouble, as you'll be open to problems related to phase issues like this, interference like this, and incredibly distracting sound placement of the voice, as it could potentially waver right and left depending on the exact microphone location on the set. Dialogue and other simple effects like Foley will typically be sent to the center channel. If you need to simulate any subtle effects that are typically afforded by stereo audio, you can add these later in the mix. Most commonly, that will include a bit of reverb to help simulate an environment and realistically place a voice in the correct 3-dimensional space. On audio track 4, you can use this real estate for additional dialogue or narration if your project has it. Okay, moving down to audio tracks 5 through 8. On these tracks, you'll add your mono sound effects. Use these tracks for simple sound effects that don't benefit from a stereo recording. That includes mostly Foley and other simple effects like a door slamming shut, a dog barking, a tire screech. You get the point. Below these mono effects, you've got 4 more effects tracks on A9 through A12. So what's the difference between these and the previous 4? These tracks should be reserved for your stereo sound effects and your stereo ambience coming in with your production audio. Also, use these to add your own third-party stereo sound effects, like room tone, ambience, or sound design that you're adding to the cut. Remember, if your software can take both stereo and mono audio on the same type of track, all these sound effects tracks can be either one. You'll basically just have 8 effects tracks in a row. But if you're using something like Avid and you need your track type to match the mono or stereo sound specifically that's being added to it, make sure these are either added as 4 stereo tracks or 4 mono pairs, whichever matches the format of your production audio. Alright, so now that we have a home for all of our sound effects, it's time for music. You'll want to reserve tracks A13 and A14 for stereo music. If your scene doesn't have music, these will just remain blank. And finally, the last 3 tracks at the bottom of our timeline are A15 through A17. These are also stereo tracks, and their job is to hold the stems that you receive from the sound department. As your cut progresses, you'll likely be collaborating with a dialogue editor, a sound designer, and either a music editor or a composer. As you receive new and shiny, cleaned up versions of these elements of your mix, you add each stem here at the bottom. 1 for dialogue, 1 for effects, and 1 for music. For example, once you receive your cleaned up dialogue stem, you'll add it on A15, and then you'll mute tracks A1 through A4, containing your rough dialogue edit. The same with your sound effects on A16. You'll mute A5 through A12. And of course your music stem will live on A17, and you'll mute your rough music edits on A13 and A14. Hey there! For tons more free editing training, head over to our website at filmeditingpro.com/free training. Here you can download free editing guides along with high-quality video training courses created by our team of professional Hollywood editors. Our tutorials cover a wide range of editing topics, like cutting awesome movie trailers, editing action scenes, how to work with music and sound design, and a lot more. All of these free guides and videos are available at filmeditingpro.com/free training. I'll see you next time.